The compact disc that we all know about was invented by Philips and Sony and released in 1982, and for 8 years the format was mostly just used for audio. Granted, the CD-ROM for computers was also invented in the late 1980s, but didn't really see much penetration in the consumer market until the 1990s. So for the better part of a decade, CDs were sold alongside cassette tapes and vinyl records as the high-end music format. However, Philips believed the format could be useful for more than just audio, and in the year 1990 they introduced the CDI player. The I stands for interactive. It was advertised as the CD player that works with your television. The CDI player originally sold for $799 on the US market, but it was quickly dropped to a more reasonable $599. They were available in most retail stores that sold electronics at the time, such as Best Buy and Micro Center, the now defunct Incredible Universe, and Sears, which doesn't even sell electronics anymore, but that's a topic for another episode.
As a kid, I was always kind of obsessed with the CDI, just from seeing it in gaming magazines. A lot of people don't remember that magazines carried articles about the Philips CDI and its games. And when you're a 11, 12-year-old kid and you see these amazing graphics, especially since they were using a lot of FMV for these games, it just looked like mind-blowing.
So this was my CDI. I wanted it when it came out, which was like the early 90s. I was in 3rd grade and I had insomnia. So I actually watched the infomercial and it hit me at a weak point, and I was really convinced that I needed this, and I tried to convince my dad.
Call this number now to receive the Magnavox CDI player, complete with digital video cartridge.
Let's take a quick look at the hardware. This is a Philips CDI 200, but it was also sold under the Magnavox brand as well. It looks very much like a regular CD player of the era. On the front here, there's a little hidden panel, and inside is a port for a wired controller. Now, while all new CDI players shipped with a wireless controller, I actually don't have one, but I do have this one, which was probably the most common wired controller. It has a D-pad in the middle, but not a very good one, and 2 buttons on the side. It's okay for operating some titles one-handed, but a lot of them you wind up having to use another hand on one of the buttons. It's not a very good controller for games. Fortunately, they did later come out with a controller similar to a Sega Genesis, and this one works much better for games. They also made a rollerball and a mouse, but I don't have either of those to show. Of course, right now there's a huge shortage of CDI controllers. I don't know why, but there are more CDI players out there than there are controllers. Fortunately, you can get a device like this, which will allow you to use a standard 15-pin controller from your PC, and so that's always an option. Let's take a look at the rear. This one called Input 2, that's actually for a second controller if you have a 2-player game, for example. A sort of irritating place to put it. And this is a digital audio output for high-end stereo systems. Pretty rare at the time, actually, as it was a pretty new thing. And then here is, of course, your standard stereo audio and composite video jacks. And it had S-video output, also something pretty new at the time, with probably only very high-end televisions supporting it. Unfortunately, I suspect 90% of the users of the CDI in 1990 were probably forced to use the RF antenna jacks, just like a VCR would have had to use at the time. Let's open it up and take a look inside. Having a look at the logic board, you might immediately notice that it's running on a 68070 CPU. At first, this sounds kind of impressive. For those that are familiar with the naming scheme of the Motorola 68000 series of processors, you might be tempted to think that the 68070 would slot in right after the 68060. But no, it's actually a custom version that's more similar in design to the original 68000, which means it's a 16-bit CPU with some 32-bit capabilities, although it does run at 15.5 MHz, so that makes it twice as fast as an Amiga 500, for example. The new player was actually designed with many different types of media in mind. Of course, the device could play standard music CDs, which were very common at the time, and these discs usually had the logo of compact disc digital audio printed on them. However, the CDI player also opened up a whole new world of media types on compact disc, including CD+Graphics, the photo CD, the video CD, not to be confused with CD video, which is actually a type of laserdisc, which is analog data and not compatible here, and of course the Compact Disc Interactive, or CDI. The CDI player today is often thought of as a failed video game console, but it was never really intended to be a video game console, at least not at the beginning. It was supposed to be a media center for your living room, sort of like the Xbox One of the day. It was going to replace your CD player and your VCR and your encyclopedias and your photo albums and of course your video game console and possibly even your computer. So let's examine each of these media types a little more closely. Being the compact disc was the focus of the system, it's sort of a given that the regular music CDs will play just fine in here. In fact, if you had this hooked up to your home entertainment system, you didn't even need to turn on your television to use the music CD feature. But you just might have wanted to turn that television on for those music CDs, because I'm about to show you something that I bet 90% of you have probably never seen or heard of before. But what I have here is just a regular music CD. At least that's how it appears on the surface. This is the exact same CD a person might have bought at Best Buy, Walmart, Musicland, or whatever. And they would have played this in their portable music players or their in-dash CD players in their cars or even in their home stereo. But if I put it in the CDI player, something magical happens. Now, I'd love to let you hear the music that goes along with this, but we all know that if I played more than 2 or 3 seconds of copyrighted music, I'd get a copyright strike from YouTube. So, for the moment, I'm just going to have to let you watch the graphics here while I'll tell you a little bit about how this worked. You see, the music encoded onto a CD has multiple different subchannels that are read right alongside the music data that it's streaming in. CD+Graphics are stored in some of the unused subchannels, and since it's a stream of data, it can't really be used to immediately throw a whole picture up on the screen at once. The data is basically displayed on the screen as it is read. The interesting thing though is that the data stream can tell where these particular pixels are supposed to go, so this allows them to modify specific places on the screen and in some cases even animate small little sections. In this case, they're using it for displaying the song lyrics that go along with what you're hearing, which again makes me sad that I can't let you hear the music with this. The graphics are limited to a resolution of around 300 by 216 pixels using a maximum of 16 colors, so this puts it in the same ballpark as a lot of computer systems and game consoles of the 1980s, which makes sense being this was developed in the 1980s anyway, even if it didn't show up on the market until 1990. Now, while this CD here isn't kind enough to even let you know that there are graphics on it, take a look at this one. This is one of my favorite albums of the time, and it actually has the little logo here that actually says graphics. So let's take a look at what's on this one. I would say that CD+Graphics was a big market failure because, like I said, the vast majority of people I've talked to didn't even know this was a thing. Millions of people owned these discs without ever even realizing that there was more on them than just the audio. If you want to actually watch some of these, there's a YouTube channel called the CD+G Museum, and I don't know how they've managed to get these songs uploaded without copyright strikes, but you can watch many of them over there, and I'll put a link down in the description. Now, let's talk about another CD type. This is a photo CD. Now, what I have here is just a demo CD, and it's on a factory press CD that was actually included with this standalone photo CD player. Now, I used to have a ton of photo CDs around, but I threw them all away a long time ago after copying them off to my home server. But for those that don't remember these, here's how that worked. During the 1990s, you were probably using a film camera, and when you were done with your roll of film, you'd go to Kmart or your local pharmacy or wherever they did film developing, and you'd find a stack of envelopes similar to this. And so you'd fill out all the personal information here, and then you'd check off what sort of prints you'd like made. And then one of the options you could pick from was a Kodak photo CD. Okay, this one actually says picture CD, which is a slightly different format that came later, but I couldn't find one of these that said photo CD on it because it would have had to have been from the 1990s. But you get the idea. So you put your film in here and you drop it off. And a few days later, you go back and you pick up your film and you get your negatives back along with a photo CD. Now, the photo CD would look a little different from this. Normally it'd be on a gold CD recordable and it'd look more like this, but this is all I have for the moment. So let's put this example photo CD in here and see how it works. Now, you might think that a photo CD is just a bunch of JPEG images stored on a CD, but it was actually a proprietary format with uncompressed raw images. In fact, even a computer could not view these photos without using special design software. But with the CDI, you could quickly and easily view these images on your living room TV. Also, keep in mind that there was only standard definition television back then. Nevertheless, these photos still look pretty good. Now let's take a look at another type of CD, the video CD. Now, believe it or not, this was the predecessor to DVD video. In fact, most DVD players were backwards compatible with video CD. However, DVD uses a different type of physical media that actually contains more information and is double-sided. Video CDs, on the other hand, use the same physical type of media as a music CD, and thus they're limited to about 700 megabytes of data. So how did they squeeze a video stream onto this? Well, they used MPEG-1 compression. Now, back in 1990, computers were not fast enough to decode an MPEG-1 stream like this using purely software, so if you look at the back of the CDI player, you'll notice a cartridge slot back here. Now, what we have inside is an add-on cartridge that contains custom hardware to decode MPEG-1 video streams on the fly. This was actually not included with the CDI player originally, as it added quite a bit of extra cost. In fact, the cartridge could be as much as several $100s. So these are some video CDs from the era, and many of these are very well-known movies. I'll pop in the Terminator 2 disc here, and let's have a look. As usual, I can't really show more than a few seconds of this or I'll wind up with a copyright violation. Of course, one problem with this format is that it could only store about an hour on a single disc, so for a 2-hour movie, the solution was simply to have 2 discs. People who used Laserdisc were already accustomed to this anyway, so it probably wasn't that big of a deal. So the advertising for these video CDs said they were VHS quality, so I thought I should put that to the test, and for that test we're going to have a look at Forrest Gump. And that's because I have this movie on both video CD and VHS. By the way, Forrest Gump actually has 3 discs. The third one's actually a documentary called Through the Eyes of Forrest Gump. And you know what? It's actually really good. In fact, I understand this version is longer and has more stuff on it than the version that comes on the DVD release as a special feature. And I think that's because this has the original Laserdisc version, which is 37 minutes, but they shortened it to 30 minutes for the TV broadcast, and that's the version included on DVD. Anyway, so let's put this in the player and see what we get. Okay, I mean, here on the TV it looks pretty good, but I need a better way to compare with VHS, so what I'm going to do is directly plug the VCR into my video capture device and grab some footage. Sorry it's showing in black and white here. I had the chroma turned all the way down for some bizarre reason, but don't worry, I fixed it and recaptured it later. Anyway, I can't really show you very much full screen capture or I'll get a copyright strike. I know I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but it is what it is. So anyway, I captured some footage from VHS, and now it's time to capture the same footage from VCD. And here's where we run into a bit of a conundrum. I did use S-Video from the CDI player since it offers it, and I think that's fair to do because VHS was incapable of S-Video by its very nature. But some people might ask why I didn't just rip the contents directly from the video CD using a CD-ROM drive on a computer, which I could have. But I felt since this was meant to be played on your television, this was probably the most fair way to compare. So I have some side-by-side clips here, and at first glance they seem pretty similar other than some difference in color balance. So what I'll do is show you some still frames I captured from both. So here's the video CD, and now VHS. Let's try it on a different frame. Again, here's video CD, and now VHS. Now let's zoom into a specific area and see if we can see a little bit more detail. So I hate to say it, but I think VHS actually looks better, and just for the fun of it, here's a 720p version of the same thing. But on the right side, video CDs can be played thousands of times without any degradation, unlike VHS. Plus, you don't have to rewind them. Okay, so we've had a look at some of the formats that the CDI player was designed to play, but none of those formats, at least up to this point, have been proprietary, meaning the music CD, the photo CD, the video CD, these are all things that could be played in other dedicated players. But of course the CDI player had its own proprietary sort of executable code, which could be used for encyclopedias or video games. The CDI player isn't known for its great library of games. Philips believed that the FMV or full motion video cartridge was the CDI player's biggest asset for games, and this allowed it to play games like Dragon's Lair. But in my opinion, I think the FMV cartridge was a hindrance. I'll use Dragon's Lair as an example. I remember when I first saw this game at the arcade and everyone was gathered around the arcade watching it being played, and the graphics looked absolutely incredible at the time. But that's because I didn't realize the game was just a bunch of pre-recorded scenes, and thus you weren't really controlling the character, rather controlling which scene comes next with careful timing. Now watching the game was fun, but once I actually played it, I was rather disappointed. And so many of the titles for CDI were designed at least partially around this premise. Games like Mad Dog McCree added in mysteries to be solved with some action.
Mad Dog McCree and his band of cutthroats, right?
But they weren't nearly as interactive as they appeared on the surface. And here's another one, Phantom Express. Now this is just a pre-recorded roller coaster scene, and the only thing you control is the little crosshairs to attempt to shoot at stuff. And here's a kids game called The Busiest Neighborhood Ever. Again, this is just a bunch of FMV scenes put together with triggers on certain areas.
If you want to find something special, move your star around until it flashes. Then press an action button and something fun will happen.
But it does allow a child to kind of explore a neighborhood. I think some of the best games on the system were games that didn't require the FMV cartridge. Tetris is a great example. Now I've played Tetris on a lot of platforms, and admittedly the original NES version is probably my favorite just from a playability standpoint, but I think the CDI version is easily my second favorite, and I think you'll see why. Every level in the game has a unique moving background plus a unique soundtrack. Here's another level. And here's the next. Pretty neat, huh? Here's another one of my favorite games. I've also played Lemmings on a number of different platforms, but this one is really unique for a few reasons. For one thing, it has this really long, like 5 minutes long intro. However, the FMV cartridge is not actually required to play the game, as for the game itself, it's very similar looking to most other 16-bit consoles and computers of the era. I think that the strongest resemblance is the Super Nintendo version, but I think the music is just one giant sample played right off the CD.
Eventually I saw AVGN's video about the CDI, and I don't know, I just never really believed that it could be that bad, and it really isn't. There's some really good titles on the CDI. Some of my favorite games on the CDI are Thunder in Paradise. It's I know this sounds strange, a great FMV game. It stars Hulk Hogan just being super hammy. It's based on a TV show he did in the 90s. And it has, especially for being just a shooter, a lot of variety. It's on rails, but it constantly changes each game where it stops, the order of the enemies. It has multiple endings. I've beaten it dozens of times at this point, and I'm still finding new FMV cutscenes.
I was really lucky enough to get Link, Zelda, or both of the Zeldas and Link. They were terrible games.
There's a great beat 'em up also called Mutant Rampage Body Slam. Really recommend that.
There's a mixture of games for them, so this was kind of their adult game called Voyeur, which it's exactly how it sounds.
Hotel Mario, it gets a lot of flack, but it's actually a really good puzzle platformer. The cutscenes aren't all that great, not much to write home about, but really, it's a pretty good game. There's also Chaos Control, which I believe even had a PS1 release. Really good ports of Myst, Seventh Guest, of course Burn Cycle, which was kind of the killer app for the CDI. It's not all sunshine and rainbows with the CDI, of course.
The golf games are pretty neat. These were all pretty much like a live action, kind of almost reminds you of Dragon's Lair or earlier PC games.
There are some things that even me, a fanatic of the CDI, don't like. One is the controllers it ships with. They're wireless, but they're infrared controllers, so naturally you lose that line of sight to your CDI, and you're not going to be playing your game, basically. I ended up getting the Genesis-style 3-button gamepad. It works pretty well. It's not the greatest gamepad in the world, not the greatest D-pad in the world, but it does work really well for the CDI games. All of the software, whether it's a game, encyclopedia, whatever software you're using for the CDI, they all had to be made to be able to use any of the input devices. So even their light gun, you can use that to play a platformer game. I don't recommend it, but you can do it if that's how you live your life. Another really interesting thing about the light gun is that it will work on a modern TV. You do not need to use a CRT. So somewhat forward thinking, I guess. To me, it's partly because of AVGN's videos about it. People don't take seriously, and it was never really meant to be a gaming platform, at least not initially. So to me, it's pretty impressive what they were able to do.
The whole point of the system was kind of to replace most all of your entertainment in your house. So they wanted it to be your VCR and be your game system and your educational system. They didn't want you to have a computer anymore, and they were just trying to replace all of that. So it was supposed to be multifaceted. They kind of achieved that to a point.
There are some hidden gems on the CDI, but like any other console, it has plenty of bad games as well, and you do have to look a little deeper to find those hidden gems.
So one thing that gets talked about a lot is that Philips managed to secure the rights from Nintendo to use some of their characters for games, such as in this port of Zelda. But they contracted these out to another firm, and the games ended up being almost universally hated. And in fact, sometimes these games are used to judge the entire CDI franchise, which I think is a bit unfair. There were many different versions of the CDI player, such as this top loader that came a few years later, and it's surprising how much smaller it is. It's supposed to open on its own, but mine needs just a little bit of help. To put a CD in, you just sit it in here, and there's no snaps or anything, and then you just close the top. On the front, you get a controller port. On the side is a power on-off switch. And on the rear, this one just has the standard low-end options for audio and video. One bizarre thing, though, is the power brick. It uses an RJ45 connection. At first glance, some people today might think this is an Ethernet port, but it's not. The model also has a slot for the FMV cartridge. You just have to squeeze here and this cover pops off. You may notice this badge on top that comes with the cartridge so that you can show externally that your model is equipped with it, but the cartridge itself is essentially the same as the one from the previous unit. The smaller top loader was priced much lower and was designed specifically to compete with the Commodore CD32, neither of which made a huge splash in the gaming market. It wasn't until the Sony PlayStation arrived in 1994 that the compact disc would make a big impact for gaming. Later they did come out with this more compact front-loading unit, and I think this was sold mostly to like schools and businesses and things like that. It seemed to have an FMV cartridge essentially built into it, although one bizarre thing I noticed is that it will not play CD+Graphics. I think the CDI player was the first of its kind, and Philips didn't really know what to do with it at the time. And I think had they bundled it with a better controller and maybe focused on a different genre of games instead of the full motion video type games, I think that it would have been more successful as a gaming console. However, it did pave the way for other consoles, including DVD video, which was based heavily off of the video CD design. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this look back at the Philips CDI, and as always, stick around to the next episode, and thanks for watching.